The Labor Day Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Hey, I got a Dogman story for you that happened in early September, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It didn't happen to me, really, but it happened to this guy who was my older brother's best friend. He claimed that he was at a big Labor Day celebration at this town that he lived in back then, but I live in now, so I don't want to mention the name of it. I will tell you that we sit almost directly in the center of the country in terms of east-west, but we're a bit on the north side. No surprise my Dogman story comes from the Midwest. This happened a long time ago, and back in those days, this other town that I now live in had a big celebration for Labor Day. I had wanted to go to it since I was a kid, but I had never been taken by my parents, no matter how much I begged. And as I grew older, I was also not allowed to go by them to the celebration by myself. I grew increasingly frustrated. One time I knew that my brother Mike's best friend, let's call him Wesley, had gone to the Labor Day celebration in this place, which we'll call Townsville for the sake of this story. So it was later on in September, probably the first week of school, when I saw Mike and Wesley hanging out. I asked Mike how the Labor Day thing went and if there were any cute girls there. He told me I was lucky my parents didn't want me to go, because some dogmen had snuck into the crowd from the nearby woods, attracted by the smell of all the food. He said some girls started screaming, and everyone had to run out of there. It was just lucky that a lot of people didn't get trampled, according to Wesley. Rather than cause me to give up on that Labor Day celebration, this news made me 10 times more interested in it, and in those woods just outside of town. I had heard of the Dogman, obviously, and I was a young teenager at the time, with a huge interest in monsters. I mean, I loved movie monsters, Bigfoot. Anything I could find about any kind of monster was interesting to me. It could even be a comedy, I didn't care. I just loved big scary things that girls screamed and ran away from. Maybe they reminded me of me at that time. So after what Wesley told me, from that point on, the Townsville Labor Day celebration became the #1 topic on my mind. The next Labor Day was going to fall less than 2 weeks before my 16th birthday, and I decided to insist to my parents that I wanted to go to the fair as my birthday present. I was getting older by then, and my parents said that we could all go as a family. That was fine with me. I didn't tell them that we might be attacked by genuine cryptid monsters while we were there. So a few days before Labor Day, I walked with Mike and Wesley over to Wes's house, and I got to meet his father for the first time. I started asking him about the dogman that invaded the Labor Day celebration and ruined everything the year before, and his dad gave me such a look like I had never gotten before. He asked me who told me about that, and Wesley confessed that he had, but he said he was only joking around. I said, yeah, we're both just joking around, because I was trying to lighten the mood. His dad seemed so weirdly over-angry about this. But instead of calming down, his dad turned to me and asked if I thought his son was a joke. I tried to answer, but he interrupted me to ask if I thought his entire family was a joke. I couldn't really answer that either before he asked me what was so funny about dogmen that I would joke about them attacking the Labor Day celebration. At this point, Wesley's mother, who hadn't even been introduced to me, came into the room shouting more questions at me, demanding to know why I thought I could be so rude to her family in their own home. The parents essentially banned me from the house after that. I was never allowed back in. Weird, right? The son said he was joking, but then the dad and mom turned it around to make it like I was picking on their son. So obviously at that point I was even more curious about what the heck this family had experienced that prior Labor Day at that celebration in Townsville. I wanted to know more, So I did what you did in those days, which was to go to one of the libraries in Townsville and look up the newspapers for the day after the previous year's Labor Day celebration. I figured there must have been some reporting about this incident, except there wasn't. So I went back a few days and looked at the articles about the event written beforehand, and I noticed that the celebration was sponsored by a list of local businesses. Further snooping revealed that most of those same businesses were the advertisers that kept the newspaper in business as well. I had a good social studies teacher in junior high school, and she taught me that newspapers are not in existence to tell you the truth. Newspapers are in existence to tell you what their advertisers tell them to tell you. That isn't just limited to the ads these local movers and shakers take out in the paper. It stretches to the editorial pages always, and the news itself sometimes. Let's say the news itself often, and leave it at that. So clearly those local businesses didn't want the news of the Dogman to get out, assuming that there was any truth to the stories. Anyway, we went to the Labor Day celebration that year. My parents had a good time, which was rare for them, and my brother Mike and I kept our eyes on the woods surrounding the town, scanning the trees for monsters. There was a point in the day when we were at the edge of the partying near the woods, and my brother shoved me suddenly, pointing. I followed where he was directing me to look, and there, at the edge of the woods, was an actual upright walking guy. But he was not a human. I only got to look at him for 2 or 3 seconds before 2 men in security uniforms ran toward him, and then the figure turned around in one swift and smooth movement and disappeared into those woods with lightning speed. When he turned, I could see that he was not moving around on human legs. They looked more like the legs of a fawn, or of Pan, or like a hairy animal's legs. And it had ears up on top of its head, too. That meant we weren't seeing a man, and we weren't seeing a Bigfoot. We were actually seeing the Michigan Dogman. It seemed that security was prepared to meet them head-on that year. My heart was beating really fast. I had my little Kodachrome or whatever tiny black plastic camera out, looking for the Dogman to come back out of those woods. It wasn't gonna, though. The security guys were seeing to that. He'd have been too far away for anything to have come out on that old dinky camera anyway. So now both my brother Mike and I were fired up about this. We had Wesley come over to our place and we made him tell us the real true story of what happened with those Dogmen at the Labor Day festival in Townsville the year before. At first he refused, even after we both promised him that we'd never tell his parents that he spilled the beans. And then my brother started trading him things from his room as a payment to get the story from Wesley. Wes took a baseball glove and some other things. Then he walked into my room and asked me what I was offering. I told him he could have some of my comic books. I laughed in relief when he only wanted the Lois Lane and Supergirl comics. I only had those because my female cousin was gonna throw them out, and I think it's a crime to throw out a comic book. But I never actually read them. I mean, they were for girls. Big Wesley sure seemed to find those drawings of girls interesting, though. And after he had taken my collection of anything with drawings of girls in mini dresses away, he was finally ready to tell us the true tale of the Labor Day Dogman. According to Wesley, the Dogmen were in the crowd from an early point in the day, before things started to get rough. He went on in a rambling way, as the guy was not very good at telling stories. He seemed to be talking about the Dogmen sometimes, about werewolves other times, and about a bunch of older kids who were bullies as well. Sometimes it seemed like these were separate groups he was discussing, but other times it felt like he was saying that they were the same guys. Mike and I had to slow him down and ask him a lot of questions. He'd give us weird answers, and then we'd have to quiz him more and more and more about those answers. Finally, this storyline began to emerge. and I'll try to get it all straight for you here. Now, this was the early 80s, it wasn't just yesterday, so I'm probably going to mess up some parts or leave sections of the story out. One thing for certain, I'll tell you more of what happened that day than the newspaper did when it happened. Now, I'm not really even sure where to start, as the story was one of those chicken and egg kinds of things. I mean, who really knows how it started? But Wesley's basic contention, and that of his panicky parents as well, is that the woods around Townsville were in those days inhabited by a race of dogmen that were, infectious. If they bit you, or sometimes even if they got too close to you, then you might become a dogman as well. So in essence, Wesley and his family believe that dogmen and werewolves are sort of almost the same thing. It took us a long time of questioning, and it was like pulling teeth. But the family thinks dogman can turn you into another dogman. But they don't think dogmen are werewolves. Like, they don't think they turn back into human beings. They're dogmen all the time, but they can turn you into one of them or something in between them and human. So this family are of the opinion that these full-time wild werewolves, called the Michigan Dogman or the Wisconsin Werewolf, are the source of people who become afflicted with lycanthropy. I mean, it is an interesting theory. I certainly can't disprove it, can you? I mean, I can't prove it either, obviously. So the narrative for that day involved a real wild dogman infiltrating the edges of the crowd in order to snag themselves some party food. Once that had happened, human partygoers began to turn, one by one, into werewolves. At first, they mostly kept on partying, not having any awareness of their own savage transformation. Wesley said his eyes were bugging out of his head at some of the people he was seeing. He said some of them looked like werewolves from old movies, but an awful lot of them had heads that looked more like dog or wolf heads. I mean to say that they were not human faces at all anymore. The skull was now something that looked like a dog or wolf skull. These were creatures with long fang-filled canine snouts, but they had these bodies that were sort of more like Bigfoot bodies. Well, I mean, they weren't Bigfoot or human bodies, really. They were dogman or wolfman bodies, with legs that looked very little like human legs at all. According to Wesley, all of the wolfmen he saw had torn clothing on. All of them had been humans before coming to that event. His father and mother saw the dogmen themselves, however. They were taller than the crowd, standing as tall as a grizzly, maybe even taller than that. They wore no clothing, because they had no culture. They were beasts of the woods that walked like men. We associate upright walking with intelligence, but when Wesley's parents described the monsters, they didn't use words like intelligent. They used words like terrifying, and intimidating, and horrible. Wesley told us that his parents were afraid the dogmen were sent to wipe out all humans for their sinning. And his parents had become avid churchgoers since the prior Labor Day. I myself saw how on edge they had become, and how unreasonable as well. Those people had certainly seen something, and whatever those creatures were, had knocked the entire bunch of them off their rockers. So there were some local bands playing on a stage, and some of the people in the crowd who were becoming werewolves seemed to be the ones who were most enthusiastic about the music. In between songs, Wesley told us that some of them would howl loudly like dogs, and that made me and Mike laugh. Wesley got really mad at us for laughing, and he said he was going to take all our stuff and not even tell us the rest of what happened. We apologized, but he had gotten really upset about all this, and he had to go in the bathroom and be alone to get himself back under control. Wes was not really a drama queen kind of a guy. I knew he was crying in that bathroom, and I couldn't really believe what was happening. When he was finally together enough to continue the story, Wesley brought up a name that I hadn't heard in some time. There was a girl named Helen that Wes was nuts about, but then he just suddenly stopped talking about her. We were about to finally hear the story of why that was. So Wesley found Helen at the Labor Day celebration. She was with some girlfriends of hers, and when Wes walked over to them, they were all nice to him, and they gave him some space to chat up the girl that he had his crush on, namely Helen. Well, things were going smoothly for Wes that day. Helen was really into him, and she especially loved that her girlfriends were getting to see how crazy he was about her. But then something happened that changed everything for those two, permanently. Remember I mentioned those bullies earlier? Well, some of them were in the crowd, and they started to really go feral. One of them spotted Wes talking to the girl, and he just ran up and started barking or snarling or something in their faces. Well, that girl absolutely lost it in fear. She didn't just scream. She peed her light-colored pants, and Wes said snot came out of her nose when she was crying. Now he really dug her, so none of that mattered to him. In fact, it made her seem more human to him, but Helen could never look Wes in the eye ever again, and she would run away when he approached. This was years before cell phones or email, so he could only call her family's landline to talk to her. And they soon told him that Helen wanted him to please stop calling and please stop coming around at all. She couldn't move past that moment when the Dogman or Werewolf literally scared the pee out of her. And apparently Wes had been extremely broken up about this for 1 full year. He never even told any of this to my brother. He just stopped mentioning Helen. Wes was pretty broken up, and it was an awkward moment. He asked if he could take our stuff and go, and we said yeah. It felt like we were torturing the poor guy. So I do have one more thing to add about the Dogman. When I first moved to Townsville here, as I'm calling it, I used to hike through the woods around the town, looking for the Dogman, but never finding him. After my wife and I had our daughter Amy, though, we did have this interesting experience with her. One day she was coloring, and she asked us what we wanted her to draw. We suggested she draw a man, and she did a crude stick figure. We asked her to draw a dog, and she drew the same stick figure, but put dog ears up on top of it. My wife laughed and reminded Amy that dogs have 4 legs, not 2. Amy, without missing a beat, looked up at her mom and said, "The ones that live behind our house walk up on 2 legs." Now that was in the early or mid-1990s, I want to say 1993 or 4. Amy would have been about 3 or 4 years old when this happened. She couldn't have possibly been older than that. We stopped allowing her to play outside in the back by herself after we heard that, and we watched her like a hawk for the rest of her childhood. She never mentioned the Dogman again, and when we asked her about this incident when she was a teenager, she had no memory of any of this having ever happened. But I think you can understand why I did want to end this email before including that little extra bit there. I do think the Dogmen or werewolves or whatever they were lived in the area at least through the 1990s, and I think maybe they still travel through and are here only part of the time. If so, then this would be their time to travel through the area when summer ends and autumn begins. So I will be keeping an eye out for them for the rest of this year. Townsville no longer has one big central Labor Day celebration, but the wife and I do plan on going into town for dinner. And on the way back, we're going to take the scenic route along the woods. Maybe it's just for the sake of nostalgia. Or maybe we'll have a chance to once again lay our eyes on the Labor Day Werewolf. It's no time for hawing or hemming. It's time we all thank Mr. James Fleming. Please join me in thanking our newest PayPal Club member, James Fleming. James is a top-tier member, which means he gets to see our secret, uncensored Dogman stories, of which we are releasing one on Sunday and one on Monday this holiday weekend. James also gets to see our secret uncensored archives, which are 25 hours long, and will soon be adding a few hours more, God willing. If you'd like to join our club and become part of the people helping make this show happen, then you just need to listen to this next little spokesmongrel fellow. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.